A massive oil sands project in Alberta that's about a decade in the making faces a potential live or die decision this month. The proposed Teck Frontier mine is awaiting approval or rejection from the federal cabinet. Politically, the stakes are high. A yes could be seen as inconsistent with the Liberals' climate commitments. A no could drive a wedge deeper between Ottawa and Alberta. But what are the environmental and economic considerations? Here's a reality check. The University of Calgary, where he focuses on environmental and natural resources law and policy. He is in Calgary. Well, Andrew Leach is an energy and environmental economist and is associate professor at the University of Alberta. He is in Edmonton. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Professor Olshansky, I want to start with you. We know this is a big project with a big environmental footprint. Lay out the environmental impact of the Teck Frontier mine if this project goes ahead when it's at full operation.
Right. So, I mean, in lots of ways, I mean, we have about 6 or 7 operating mines right now in the Fort McMurray region. This one would be the furthest north. And so part of the trick is what maybe distinguishes it a little bit from those other projects is its proximity to Wood Buffalo National Park. There's also the Ronald Lake bison herd in this area that we know will be impacted, and there's a lot of concern about that. So, I mean, but you know, one of the things that is fairly consistent across the board here is that we know that there are massive landscape scale impacts. And then there are, you know, what we, I think, focus on a little bit is actually the reclamation end of things. We know that oil sands projects, mining projects like this generate significant tailings. That's going to be a problem here. We know that there are considerable impacts at the end for reclamation in terms of like site closure and how those sites are going to interact with the Athabasca River as an example. And the idea here that there's going to be a massive end pit lake. And then, of course, in the meantime, we have, you know, significant emissions. There will be significant impacts on wetlands. There will be significant impacts on endangered species like the woodland caribou as a result of habitat loss. And then, of course, also the GHG emissions, which are, you know, roughly 4.1 million, I think, tons, we said, per year, CO2e equivalent.
So I was looking at the op-ed piece that you published on CBC.ca, Professor Olshansky, and it's like 100,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of tailings generated over this, and a cleanup process that will go to 2131, so well into the next century. So how does that compare with other projects?
So they all have this general, you know, and this is one of the things actually that we're worried about, I think, and that we wanted to sort of signal in this piece, is that they all have these very long reclamation sort of horizons. In fact, most of the work, if you look at the schedules, and some of these have been, you know, Pembina Institute did a good job of sort of placing these on a graph on their website. Everything here really doesn't get started until after 2030 and extends well into the end of the century and then beginning to the next. And that's a really big problem, I think, in terms of, you know, I think there was an assumption maybe 10 years ago when a lot of these mines came on site and online that was going to be an acceptable horizon. But when we start looking at climate change and climate change policy, and we're seeing, you know, the World Energy Outlook and these other organizations where they're starting to revise and see that there are going to be implications here for the price of oil, for instance, then suddenly those long time horizons become a little bit problematic and create a lot of uncertainty, I think, about whether or not we're going to be able to get this work done and whether the companies are going to be able to get it done.
So, Andrew Leach, I want to bring you in on this because the oil price that this project needs to be economically viable, according to the people who are behind it, is a fair bit higher than it is today and a fair bit higher than it is projected. So given the uncertainty about oil price and the long horizon for this, how viable is this project?
Well, I think right now the answer is it isn't viable, and it's one of maybe 20 that are in the queue that could be built that are waiting for higher oil prices. What makes this project special is it's probably the one that's waiting for the highest oil price. It's a mine is always going to be an expensive long-term bet on oil, and you're buying the length of time of the project, that 40-year production horizon. And when, as Martin said, when we're talking about what's changing in the world in terms of global oil demand, action on climate change, these types of projects require a much longer term bet on high prices than some of the other ones do.
So, Andrew Leach, so if you look at the job numbers, 7,000 jobs in construction, 2,500 jobs when the mine is up and running and is operational. I mean, can you conceive a point, I mean, given the job spin-off and the royalty benefits that this would bring, can you see a point where this could get over the bar of being economically viable?
Sure, but as you pointed out, you're looking at oil prices that are certainly 70, if not into the $80 a barrel range. Mm-hmm. And the other thing we highlighted in our piece, which I think is really important, is that as that price comes down, as we end up closer to a break even, you're also cutting down the royalty impacts and cutting down the tax impacts. So a lot of people are citing that $70 billion number or what have you that's in Teck's application, but a lot of that comes from the fact that that you're dealing in high oil prices in that estimate. If you pull the oil price down, you're going to take away a lot of those taxes and royalties that would come with it.
So Martin Olshinsky, it sounds like the environmental downside is pretty clear, but the economic upside is fairly uncertain at this point. If you were advising the cabinet on this issue, they need to make a decision by the end of this month. What would you tell them to do?
Well, yeah. So I mean, so one of the things that we've pointed out is that, of course, that there might be, there's definitely some merit to think that some of these numbers maybe need revision, right? That they are outdated. This project entered the queue about 8-9 years ago, so it might be time to take a look at that. There are significant changes, I think, in circumstances. But I think the other thing to say is that, for a lot of these issues, especially including tailings, I mean, there's been the tradition in this context has been to defer to the province. And notwithstanding the fact that a lot of these things, and tailings in particular, are going to have significant impacts on areas of federal jurisdiction, especially fish-bearing waters right in the area. And so I think one thing would be to really think very seriously about maybe breaking with that convention and insisting on some rigorous terms and conditions with respect to tailings to make sure that these don't become legacy issues down the road.
That would make it even less economically viable, though, would it not? Putting extra conditions like that?
Well, it might, but I mean, we're staring at 1.4 trillion liters of tailings right now, and it's more or less, the few reports that have been done and looked into this from an independent sort of scientific perspective has said that we have not yet demonstrated the ability to reclaim these tailings at scale. And so this is and we're already dealing with, again, like I said, the legacy situation right now is around 1.4 trillion. So the idea that you would pile on bring on another mine that would pile onto that inventory when you really don't have any basis for saying that this is an issue that we can deal with. I think that any responsible regulator in any kind of government has to take a look at that side of the ledger as well.
Andrew Leach, do you see any way for the federal cabinet to get the yes on this project? And if it is a no, how would you recommend they go about addressing the fallout that this would undoubtedly create in Alberta?
I think I'd follow on Martin's comment. To get to yes on this project, I think the federal cabinet not only needs assurance around tailings and endangered species, but they probably need more assurance on greenhouse gases as well. So they need to be able to say that this is locked in terms of Alberta's 100 megaton cap. They've been pretty clear on that. It's not yet regulated. But, I'd come back to what Martin said. This is a problem that goes beyond the Teck mine. So insofar as both Premier Kenney and Premier Trudeau are trying to find a way, I think, to come to an agreement on this, there's a way that Alberta can help this, which is to say, we're going to solve our reclamation liabilities problem. We're going to push for tailing solutions, and we're not going to approve something in our own house that doesn't have a solution to it. So if you look at the Teck application, they basically say, yeah, it's a long time before we have to deal with these end pit lakes and this tailings problem for this project. But it's not a long time for other projects that are on the landscape in Alberta. And so I think insofar as the federal government can not use this project in the pejorative sense, but help push Alberta towards getting a better overall framework and a handle on its reclamation liabilities, there might be a win-win here on the environment and the oil sands side.
Okay, gentlemen, we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to Andrew Leach and Martin Olshinsky. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.